Hello, 5Y. I hope you're having a great Wednesday and that you're outside, get outside at some point. I know it's supposed to be a beautiful day. So definitely you're going to want to work through your seesaws so that you have some time at least to enjoy the day. As for social studies, today we are going to be talking about the Texas Revolution. And the Texas Revolution is, again, going to be one of these very large topics that we have to talk about in a very short period of time. So there's a lot more to this than what we are going to be able to cover in today's lesson. So if you ever want any additional resources or you ever get to the point that you have some additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will definitely send that your way. I apologize that we have to do it so quickly, but unfortunately, because of COVID, that's how we have to do it today. So, again, as I said, we're going to talk about the Texas Revolution, and I want to once again just introduce myself. My name is Ms. Schisler, and I am the student teacher in Mrs. Patterson's room. If you ever happen to have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, what to expect. We're going to first introduce the basics. We're going to learn some basic facts about the Texas Revolution and give us some background knowledge about it so that we can understand why it occurred. We're also going to talk about some important people, some influential people that were involved in the Texas Revolution. And finally, we're also going to talk about the Alamo. And you might have heard about the Alamo because the Alamo has become quite famous, but we'll definitely get into that and learn what had occurred there. Before we do get started on today's lesson, I just want to review some key terms and essential questions with you. So some terms that we're going to talk about today is the idea of revolution, colonist, Comanche, and Apache. Those are two different Native American tribes. Dictator, a founder, a region, independence, the idea of something enduring, continuing onward, a symbol, and finally casualties. Two questions that we should be thinking about throughout this lesson that we should be able to answer by the end of this video is what conflict arose between the Texas colonists and the Republic of Mexico? And two, how did the Texas Revolution impact the history of the United States? And both of these are going to be very obvious and clear as we go through this lesson. So let's get started. Again, we're going to start with the basics. So, as you can see here, the Texas Revolution started in October of 1835, and it lasted April of 1836. So it was a decently long time in which the revolution was occurring. It was between both Mexico and Texas colonists. So let me get some background information for you. Mexico at this time was, yes, its own independent country, as it is today. However, Texas was really a land or a territory at this time that was owned by the Mexican government. It was not part of the United States at this point of time. And Texas Revolution is really important because it has two main results. First is that it gained independence from Mexico. Remember how I just told you? Texas was part of Mexico at the time. It gained independence, aka freedom. And it caused the Republic of Texas to be founded. So after Texas was freed from Mexico, it actually became its own little, we'll call it a country. It wasn't quite a country. It's a republic. It's a little bit different. But it became its own area for, as you can see, a decent amount of years, from 1836 to 1845. And the Texas Revolution is also known as the War of Texas Independence, again, because it got to the point that the result of the war was Texas was gained its independence and was finally free of the Mexican government. As you can see from that map, it kind of gives you how the Texas Revolution was occurring. So how did the Texas Revolution all start? It all started because the Republic of Mexico, which is what we now know as just Mexico, and of course Texas, recently gained its independence from Spain. Remember, Spanish conquistadors came over and they had inhabited the area and they had claimed it for their own. and that is how the Republic of Mexico was founded. However, like the United States, they wanted their freedom and they fought against the Spanish, and they had recently gained their independence in 1821. The northern region, though, of the Republic of Mexico, which is where Texas is, was dominated by Apache and Comanche Native Americans. So these were two different tribes of Native Americans, and they're typically known to have been more aggressive tribes. And because of this, a lot of settlers from Mexico did not want to move there and put their lives at risk. So the Mexican government ended up encouraging Americans to move into Texas, that area, so that there was people that were living there besides the Native Americans, and they would be living under the Republic of Mexico. So this led to the colonization of Texas, because the Mexican government wanted the Americans and white settlers to move into the area. So remember, Texas was considered a part of Mexico. And one thing that drew Americans or other white or English settlers or foreigners was the idea of slavery. Slavery was abolished or gotten rid of in Mexico. However, in a way to attract people to that region in which there were sometimes some hostile native tribes, they allowed American immigrant slaveholders, people who would have enslaved individuals, to continue to have those enslaved individuals and not have any repercussions of doing so. Another thing that happened was the Mexican government exempted settlers from certain tariffs and taxes. So tariffs and taxes is a payment on goods and services, and it's kind of like a money. It's a tax they take away from. So they did not have to pay these taxes 7 years under the Imperial Colonization Law of January 1823. And so two things that drew Americans and white settlers there was the idea that, one, they could have enslaved people with no consequences, and two, they did not have to pay taxes or pay for goods and services. And one thing that also occurred is the Anahuac disturbance and the conventions of 1832 and 1833. This is when it all came to an end. Finally, the Mexican government had enough people moving into the region of Texas, and they decided to stop all ties. So they actually created a law against white settlers or Americans moving into Texas. Of course, this did not go over well because it was made up primarily of former Americans and white people. So while this is occurring, there was a man that's going to be very important. His name is Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. And he was a leading general. He was a general at the time, and he was rebelling against the current president of Mexico, which was Anastasio Bustamante. This is all occurring at once, and this is all going to lead up to the true Texas Revolution. Again, to kind of just go over what we talked about, we have the idea, remember, that it resulted in Texas having some independence and freedom, and the Republic of Texas was founded. We learned that the northern region, aka Texas, was dominated by Apache and Comanche tribes of Native Americans, and that Mexico had recently gained its freedom from Spain. And since no one wanted to move to the northern area, they allowed Americans and other foreign settlers to move in. In doing so, they also kind of made the move a sweeter deal by allowing slavery to occur and exempting them from some taxes and paying some money. And finally, in the Anahuac disturbance and the conventions, the Mexican government decided to say, no, there may no longer be any foreign settlers onto our land. And Santa Anna, or Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, was rebelling against the current president. So those were a lot of facts that occurred there. If you ever have any questions throughout this, don't hesitate to reach out to me on CSAL. I am definitely here to help you. Now let's move to the important people. One person that was very, very important was Stephen Austin. And he was a little bit before the Texas Revolution, but he plays a key role because he was one of the most influential Texans of all time. In fact, he's known as the father of Texas. and he ended up suppressing a rebellion against settlers and the Mexican government earlier. But his real big claim to fame was that he decided to follow his father's dream, and he wanted to colonize Texas. So he kind of sweetened the deal and allowed more white people and more settlers to move into the area. If you're thinking, I've heard of Austin, Texas, this is where the term Austin, Texas comes from Stephen Austin. Remember, he is the father of Texas. We also talked about Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He eventually became the president of Mexico after he overthrew the president in his rebellion. And he was the primary leader, he was the leader, I should say, of Mexico during the Texas Revolution. And his most noteworthy battles were the Battle of the Alamo and the Battle of San Jacinto. So all of these are together, and he played a very key role because he was the leader of the one side of the Texas Revolution, the Mexican government. On the other side, we had the Mexican government, we had the Texas colonists. They were led by Sam Houston. And Sam Houston was the leader of the regular Texas Army during the Texas Revolution. And he, as you can see, won the Battle of San Jacinto. And he was also the first president of the Republic of Texas. Remember when I told you Texas was not become part of the United States at first? It became kind of its own little country in a way. It was called a republic, and he was the first president of that republic. So if you think of, I've heard of Houston, Texas, this is where Houston, Texas gets its name. We also have William B. Travis, and William B. Travis was the leader of the troops at the Alamo. And the Alamo is a fort that is located in Texas. And he was most famous, his claim to fame was for his quote of the line in the sand. And if you can see from that image on the bottom, it says, on March 3rd, 1836, Colonel William Travis asked his men to cross the line if they were willing to risk their lives for Texas. So he was known for making a great speech in which he persuaded people to come to decide whether or not they were going to fight for their beliefs and fight for Texas that they all wanted and to be separate from the Mexican government. And many of those men had stepped up to the plate and crossed that line, which would play a very key role in our next topic, the Alamo. Again, there are a lot more people involved. There's a lot more information that we could be going into, but we unfortunately just don't have the time for today. So if you ever have any additional questions, please let me know. All right, so the Alamo. The Alamo is a fort, and yes, that's a picture of it on the right. It still stands to this day, and it was also a battle. So it's known as the Battle of the Alamo because it occurred at Fort Alamo. It occurred on February 23rd, 1836, and lasted till March 6th, 1836. So it lasted a grand total of 13 days. And what happened was thousands of Mexican soldiers marched onto the Fort Alamo that had about 200 Texan volunteer soldiers in it. And they decided that they were going to march inward and take over Texas. And they were going to first start by taking over the Alamo. The people, in terms of the Texas volunteer soldiers, they were led by William Travis and also someone named James Bowie. However, the crazy story about this is while there was only 200 men that were inside the fort, and there were thousands of men outside the fort on the Mexican government side, those 200 men held the Mexican government off without them having a victory for 13 days. 13 days. They only had 200 men and they held them off for 13 days. It was a great, yes, a loss, but a victory for their part. And there's always legacy that goes with it. A lot of us here remember the Alamo. This serves as an important reminder for all of us. One is to remember the individuals who lost their lives. Only a couple of Texans volunteers survived. Unfortunately, General Santa Anna decided that he was not going to take any prisoners. And so if they were left, he would most likely have killed them. So that was very unfortunate for their sake. However, there were a couple of survivors. And so remember, the Alamo comes from that quote of just remembering the individuals who gave up their lives for the freedom of Texas. And also, though, is it like an everlasting and enduring symbol of their resistance? You know, they did not want to be oppressed or have, by oppression, we mean put down, not given equal rights, as well as their struggle or their desire to be free for independence. And so to this day, the quote remains that we all think of: remember the Alamo. So that is the end of our lesson today. I know it was kind of a very quick overview of the Texas Revolution. There is a lot more to explore, and you're going to get to explore a little bit more with the activities. So definitely check those out on Seesaw and complete those. If you ever have any questions, please let me know. We will go through this. I will take some time to answer any of your questions, and I hope you enjoy getting to experience at least a little bit of the history of where Texas came from and how eventually, while it was a republic, while we didn't get to talk about it today, it did become obviously part of the United States. So again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Seesaw. And it was great talking to you today. Have a great day.